When the last plane leaves Antarctica for the winter, they warn you about the silence. They tell you it sinks into your bones, settles behind your ribs, takes up residence in places no sound has ever lived. But nothing prepared me for the moment the engines began to fade and the snow swallowed the last traces of human presence beyond our small outpost. I stood on the packed ice runway with the others, squinting against the chalk-white glare. The plane lifted into the low sun, climbing through a haze of blowing frost, and for a moment its shape shimmered like heat mirage. Then the wind shifted and the sky folded around it, and the sound of its engines thinned to a mere vibration in my teeth. One last echo, then nothing. 8 months before we would see another aircraft. 8 months before fresh supplies. 8 months before the world even remembered we existed. The moment the silence landed fully, it hit with a physical force. The world didn't feel empty. It felt paused, held in some unnatural suspension. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. The veterans stood there with me, shoulders hunched, hands buried in thick gloves. They had experienced this before. They claimed it was always the same. The first day of winter over. The start of the long night. One of them, a mechanic named Dwyer, clapped me on the shoulder and let out a laugh that sounded more like an exhale. "Welcome to the dead season," he said. "If you hear the ice talking tonight, don't answer. It only encourages it." A couple others chuckled, but their faces didn't move. Only their voices did. It was the first time I noticed that about them. Their mouths smiled less than their eyes smiled less than their voices. Everything felt forced, as if they were performing the role of relaxed scientists watching a plane depart, but none of them believed it. We trudged back toward the station, our boots crunching through the hardened crust. The sun hovered low on the horizon, a pale gold ring bleeding through the white sky. It would vanish soon, and in a few weeks the long darkness would swallow the continent. The station itself sat half buried in sculpted drifts, metal siding gleaming with ice, antennas coated in a brittle silver crust. Every footstep echoed strangely, reflecting off the broad emptiness like we were walking inside a massive hollow shell. Inside the main airlock, the mood shifted instantly. The crew shed their gear, the clatter of metal and fabric loud against the otherwise muted atmosphere. The heaters hummed, ventilation throbbed, but everything felt too quiet underneath it all. A pressure chamber of stillness. "New guy gets the packet," said Commander Elson, shaking off frost from his beard. He handed me a laminated sheet as casual as passing me a dinner menu. "House rules, read it before bed." I nodded, tucking it under my arm. I assumed it covered protocols about movement between wings, snow tunnel safety, generator restrictions, emergency drills, routine stuff. But when I reached my room and unfolded it, I found something else entirely. The rules were simple, short, written in clipped, almost military phrasing. Rule 1: do not answer knocks after midnight. Rule 2: do not acknowledge movement beyond the perimeter lights. Rule 3: if a figure is seen standing with its face obscured, do not speak. Rule 4: do not engage with the man with no face. Rule 5: do not record him, do not photograph him, do not describe him aloud. I stared at the sheet, waiting for the joke to reveal itself. Some morale prank for newcomers. Every station had its rituals, fake legends, ghost stories. My finger tapped the edge of the laminate. The rules felt deliberately vague, but the phrasing was unsettling. As if they were not written for amusement, but as a condensed form of something that once required far more words. I brought it to dinner, holding it up. "All right, who wrote this?" I asked. A few veterans exchanged looks. Not smiles, not amusement looks. Dwyer shrugged. "Just follow them, saves trouble." "What trouble?" I asked. Nobody answered. Even Commander Elson avoided my gaze. He took a slow drink of rehydrated coffee, eyes on the table. An icy draft rolled through the mess hall despite the closed doors. I folded the sheet again and put it in my pocket. After dinner, I finished unpacking. My room was small, barely larger than a shipping container. A bunk, a metal desk, a single high window with triple-layered glass. The kind of room designed less for comfort and more for containing a person through 8 months of forced introspection. I told myself I would grow used to it. Night fell faster than I expected. Not a gentle descent into shadow, but a sudden extinguishing of light. One moment the sky was a dull peach. The next it was iron black, the horizon erased behind a curtain of drifting snow. I lay in bed for hours, listening to the strange quiet of the station settling into its nighttime rhythm. Pipes creaked, metal contracted. The building exhaled long, deep groans as if adjusting its spine beneath the weight of winter. I tried to focus on the hum of the vents, the distant thrum of generator turbines, anything to drown out the sense of oppressive stillness pressing against the walls. Around 2 in the morning, I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, slow, measured. Crunching across the snow outside my window. I opened my eyes, pulse kicking hard against my ribs. The steps were clear. Human, calm, deliberate packing. Someone walking not in a hurry, not lost, but exploring. No one had any reason to be outside, not at this hour, not without announcing it over radio, not with temperatures able to freeze exposed skin in less than a minute. I pushed myself up, moving toward the window. Frost veiled the glass in crystalline patterns. I could barely see through it, but the sound of footsteps grew louder, approaching, circling. Then stopping, right beneath my window. The silence that followed was worse than the walking. I stood motionless, breath shallow, the glass fogged slightly from my exhale. Nothing moved. No shadows, no voices, no wind. Then a final step, one sharp crunch in the snow. Directly under me. I whispered to myself that it was nothing, just ice shifting, just paranoia, just my mind manufacturing shapes in the dark. But beneath that whisper was another thought, one I didn't want to acknowledge. The footsteps had rhythm, weight, intent. And I had no explanation for them. Hours later, as the first thin blue hint of dawn crept across the horizon, I remembered the laminated rules in my pocket. Rule 1: do not answer knocks after midnight. The footsteps had not knocked, but they had come right to the wall, close enough to listen, close enough to study the shape of my room, close enough to learn me. And I realized, with a coldness deeper than any Antarctic wind, that the veterans had not been joking about anything. The rec room felt smaller than usual that evening. Maybe it was the way everyone crowded into the far half of the space, leaving a clear path between the door and the stove, as if expecting something to barge through at any moment. Maybe it was the silence that hovered over the group, heavy and expectant, broken only by the faint droning hum of the generator 2 buildings away. Or maybe it was simply my lack of sleep after the footsteps outside my window. Whatever the reason, when Commander Elson walked in with the laminated rules tucked under his arm, the air in the room tightened. He didn't bother calling for attention. He didn't need to. Everyone froze the moment he stepped forward. He began reading the rules the same way a priest might recite scripture that no one wanted to believe in but everyone feared. Rule 1, he said, voice steady, do not answer knocks after midnight. The team nodded in grim unison. A few looked at the floor, others stared at the wall. No one questioned it. Rule 2, do not acknowledge movement beyond the perimeter lights. The perimeter lights were a series of faint amber bulbs half buried in ice, circling a small radius around the station. They flickered often. The idea that something might move just outside that dim halo was unsettling enough. The fact that acknowledging it was forbidden made my stomach twist. Rule 3, if a figure is seen with its face obscured, do not speak. A strange shiver went through the room. Someone exhaled shakily, someone else gripped their coat sleeve with white knuckles. Elson paused before continuing. Rule 4, do not ask questions about the man with no face. A quiet ripple of discomfort passed through the group. Not a single person looked at me, but I felt their awareness settle on me all the same. The newcomer, the one who didn't know the unspoken things everyone else had already learned the hard way. Elson lowered the sheet slightly. These rules are not negotiable, he said. They are not for tradition or morale, they are for survival. I raised my hand before I could stop myself. Sir, I said, what exactly are these rules preparing us for? Every head turned toward me, not quickly, slowly, like a room full of dolls whose heads rotated one by one. Elson's jaw tightened, his gaze warned me before he spoke, but I waited anyway. These rules exist because every winter, without fail, someone forgets them, he said, and the station pays for it. That doesn't answer my question. He folded the sheet and placed it on the table with deliberate care. We do not explain the rules, he said, we follow them. His tone shut the conversation down, no one else dared to speak. The meeting ended without ceremony. People drifted out quietly, not relaxed, not chatting, just dispersing like a flock that sensed snow predators nearby. When I stepped into the hallway, I noticed something I hadn't before. Every window curtain was taped along its edges, sealed completely against the frame. The tape was old, layered, replaced many times over. Some panes even had blackout cloth stapled across them beneath the tape. This wasn't for insulation. This was to blot out visibility entirely. I walked past the communications room and found two of the older researchers sliding heavy deadbolts across the interior doors. They glanced at me but said nothing. One of them slid the lock twice, testing it with the same familiarity someone might test a seatbelt. You do this every night, I asked. Neither answered, they just moved to the next door. The station felt different now, less like a research outpost and more like a bunker. The kind built not to withstand the weather but to withstand something that approached deliberately. Later, back in my room, I took the laminated sheet from my pocket and studied it again. Simple rules, vague but written with purpose. Written by someone who had seen something that couldn't be forgotten. I ran my thumb across the plastic surface, feeling cold dread settle into my chest. It wasn't fear of the unknown. It was fear of the known that no one was willing to say aloud. Outside, night pressed heavily against my window. I couldn't see the sky through the frost-veiled glass, but I sensed vast emptiness just beyond it. A landscape so wide and so dead that anything standing out there would have no place to hide, which meant if something approached the station, there would be no way to miss it. At around 10, I wandered into the kitchen hopping for hot tea. Instead, I found Dwyer and two others at the table, tightening screws on a metal brace they were installing above the back door. I watched as they drilled it into place. "You expecting a storm?" I asked. Dwyer kept working, jaw clenched. "Always expect storms," he said. "It's winter. But you're reinforcing from the inside." He stopped drilling but didn't turn. "Go to bed, new guy." His tone wasn't unkind. It was resigned, like someone urging a child to leave a room before they notice something frightening. I poured tea, but my hands shook as I held the cup. Something about the atmosphere told me this wasn't preparation for weather. This was preparation for intrusion. As I headed back to my room, I noticed something else. The veterans walked the hallways a particular way, not casually, purposefully, as if every night was a drill they had repeated so many times the motions were ingrained. Lock this door, test that seal, secure that hatch, tape that corner, check that camera, every step deliberate and synchronized. A silent ritual of survival. When I reached my room, I tested the door. It already had an interior bar latched across the frame. I hadn't placed it there. Someone else had done it while I was in the meeting. A quiet precaution, a warning unspoken. I unlatched it, then latched it again. The click echoed unnaturally loud in the small space. As I lay in bed, I heard the crew finishing their nightly routine, doors slamming shut, locks snapping into place, heavy objects being moved against walls, someone whispering a count under their breath as if checking off a list they feared to forget. Then silence. A silence deeper than the night before, not empty, not peaceful, a silence built from pressure, as if the entire station were holding its breath. I stared at the ceiling, replaying Elson's voice in my mind. Never answer a knock after midnight. Never acknowledge movement beyond the perimeter lights. Never speak to anyone standing with their face hidden. Never ask questions about the man with no face. Questions formed in my mind anyway, all of them circling the same frozen dread. Why the face? What had they seen? What had they survived? What had they lost? The wind moaned outside, brushing against the building like something searching for weak points. The metal framework creaked. A distant thud echoed from somewhere deeper in the station, followed by hurried footsteps and a muttered voice telling someone to secure the hatch. I pulled the blankets tight. Tonight, no footsteps came to my window. But somehow that made it worse. Because the veterans were acting like soldiers preparing for a siege. And sieges only happen when the enemy already knows where you live. The storm rolled in without warning. One moment the horizon was a clean sheet of pale silver, the next it dissolved into a shifting wall of white that swallowed the landscape like a living thing. The generator alarms began to pulse through the station, sharp and rhythmic, signaling wind speeds. No one wanted to see this early in the season. Commander Elson called for all exterior equipment to be secured, shouting over the rising roar. The wind pressed against the walls with enough force to make the metal ribs groan and flex. Supplies rattled on shelves. Snow hammered the windows in frantic bursts. We need the exterior sensors locked down before the frost strips them, Elson said. Volunteers. My hand rose before I thought better of it. Dwyer shot me a look, not angry, just tight with something like worry. You sure, new guy? He asked. I can handle it. He muttered something under his breath but grabbed a coat and followed me to the gear lockers. Minutes later, we braced ourselves in the airlock as the storm clawed at the outer door. When it opened, the wind slammed into us with enough force to stagger my steps. The world outside was unrecognizable. Nothing existed more than a few feet ahead. Snow blasted across the ground in horizontal sheets. The sky and earth fused into a single blinding void. Even the station's dark metal siding vanished behind us within seconds. This is why you don't go out in a whiteout unless you have to, Dwyer yelled, his voice ripped apart by the wind. I clipped my safety line to the railing that ran between the buildings and moved forward. The rope jerked with each gust like something alive and irritated by my presence. The cold cut through my layers instantly, seeping into joints and fingertips. Ice crystals formed on my eyelashes. Every breath felt like inhaling powdered glass. We reached the first set of exterior sensors. They hung at odd angles, battered by wind, their metal casings ringing faintly. Dwyer fought to realign them while I anchored the base brackets, my gloves struggling to keep a grip. Snow filled every crease and opening, packing itself into shapes that grew and melted and reformed like writhing organisms. The storm had a kind of rhythm, not consistent, not natural, more like breathing, a slow inhale, a hard exhale, a pause, another inhale. The wind pulsed instead of howled. At first I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but then it returned. That strange cadence, a long, low pull of air as if the storm were drawing breath through an invisible lung. I paused. The sound wasn't simply atmospheric, it was directional. It came from ahead near the generator shack. "Hey," I yelled to Dwyer, "you hear that?" But he was busy tying off a cable and didn't respond. I stepped forward a few feet, trying to peer through the white. The storm churned violently, but something darker interrupted the blur, a shape, tall, rigid, perfectly still. I blinked hard, thinking it was a pipe or an antenna distorted by blowing snow. But as my vision adjusted to the shifting light, the shape gained definition. Not metallic, not mechanical, human-sized, human-shaped. A figure stood near the corner of the generator shack. Its body not swaying despite the wind. Its head tilted slightly as if listening. I felt the temperature around me drop further. The breathing rhythm in the storm grew stronger, syncing with my heartbeat in a nauseating pattern. I squinted, trying to find facial features. Eyes, a mouth, anything to classify it as a person. There were none. The face was smooth and pale, almost luminous in the storm. No eye sockets, no nose, no mouth, just blank skin stretched over the suggestion of a skull. My breath stilled in my throat. The cold inside me deepened until it felt like something squeezing my lungs. I wanted to call out to Dwyer but couldn't. The figure wasn't moving. It wasn't reacting. It was simply standing there, studying me without eyes, watching me without sight. The storm twisted around it in uneasy patterns, as if avoiding contact with its form. The tilt of its head shifted a degree, barely perceptible, but enough to break whatever thread of denial kept me rooted. Something buried instinctively inside me recoiled. Every primitive warning sense screamed. This was not human. A violent gust of wind hit, forcing me to crouch. Snow blasted sideways like shards. When I looked up again, the figure was still there, still facing me, still patient. Still wrong. Dwyer finally approached, shouting something I couldn't hear. His hand grabbed my shoulder and jerked me backward. I didn't resist. My muscles felt frozen, locked in fear. He dragged me back toward the safety line and shoved me into motion. I stumbled through the whiteout, unable to take my eyes off the spot where the figure had stood. The storm thickened, swallowing everything in turbulent white until no shapes remained. When we reached the airlock, Dwyer slammed the outer door behind us and immediately rounded on me. "You do not stop in a storm like that," he snapped, breath shaking. "You freeze up, you die." I couldn't speak, not yet, not with my heartbeat still pounding in my throat. Inside the main hallway, warmth returned slowly, painfully. My fingers burned as blood flow returned. My skin prickled violently. Dwyer watched me, expression unreadable. "What did you see?" he asked. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out, not at first. My mind churned, replaying the blank face, the tilted head, the unnatural stillness. "I saw someone," I finally whispered, "near the generator shack." The moment the words left my tongue, the air in the hallway shifted. A few nearby crew members froze mid-step. Someone stopped, closing a cabinet door. Another lowered a mug without drinking. "What do you mean, someone?" Dwyer asked, voice low. "I don't know," I said, tall, facing me, no facial features. Silence thickened. Dwyer's jaw tensed. Commander Elson appeared from the comms room, face drained of all color. He looked at me for a long moment, studying every detail of my posture, my expression, my hesitation. "Describe it," he said quietly. I hesitated, the laminated rules flashed through my mind. "Do not describe him aloud." I think it was a hallucination," I said. Someone near the door exhaled sharply, either relief or dread. It was impossible to tell. But Elson's expression did not ease. He stepped closer. "Did you truly see nothing?" he asked. I swallowed. "I saw something," I admitted, "but I don't know what." A whisper came from the back of the room, brittle and fearful. "The season started early." Elson shut his eyes briefly, as if steadying himself. Then he looked at me with a heaviness that said the rules were not written for superstition. They were written for survival. Dr. Hayes began unraveling quietly, not through sudden behavior or dramatic breakdown, but through small things that built like frost accumulating layer by layer on glass. It started with him lingering at windows long after the rest of us had moved on. He would stand with his fingertips resting lightly on the sill, eyes unfocused, chest barely moving as if he were trying to hear something through the triple glass. Sometimes his lips moved faintly, forming words that made no sound. During meals, he sat at the far end of the table, pushing food around without eating. The lines beneath his eyes grew darker. His skin lost warmth. He stopped laughing at small jokes, stopped contributing to discussions, stopped acknowledging when anyone spoke directly to him unless they repeated it twice. Most of us were too tired to do more than worry silently, but Commander Elson watched him closely. His eyes followed Hayes every time he drifted toward a window or froze in a hallway to listen to some sound only he seemed able to hear. One night near 2 in the morning, I woke to faint metal scraping. Slow, steady, coming from somewhere near the back of the station. At first I thought it was the metal contracting from temperature drop, but the pattern was too intentional. I slipped from my bunk and stepped into the corridor. The lights were dimmed to night mode, a muted blue glow that made shadows look fluid. I followed the sound toward the rear airlock. Someone was standing there. Hayes. He had one hand on the locking wheel, slowly turning it. His shoulders hunched forward, his head tilted toward the door as if listening for something on the other side. Hayes, I whispered. He flinched, then turned. His eyes were wide and glassy, reflecting the pale light like wet stones. Did you hear him? He asked. I stepped closer. Hear who? His breath shook as he looked back at the sealed door. It was Thompson. He called my name. He swallowed hard. He sounded hurt, like he needed help. Thompson's asleep, I said. Everyone is. No, he whispered. He was out there, calling from just beyond the threshold. I know his voice. My chest tightened. I remembered the rule about knocks, about answering anything after midnight. Hayes, I said gently, no one is outside. It's the middle of the night and the temperature is dangerous. You know that. He stared at me, confused, then uncertain. A tremble passed through him, like his mind was caught between two truths. Without another word, he lowered his hand from the lock and stepped back. I guided him toward his room, his footsteps sluggish and uneven. Before entering, he stopped in the doorway. What if he calls again? He asked. He won't, I said. But Hayes didn't believe me. I saw it in the way his hand clutched the doorframe, in the way he watched the hallway as if expecting something to appear. When I finally returned to my room, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the station felt amplified. Every shifting pipe, every settling joint in the metal bones of the outpost, every distant hum carried a threat I couldn't fully understand. The next morning, Hayes didn't show up for breakfast, or for midday check-in, or for shift rotation. We searched his room, bed made, boots missing, winter gear gone. His journal sat open on his desk with a half-written sentence. I think I finally understand the whispering in the ice. The sentence ended abruptly, the pen having dragged a faint line across the page as if pulled from his hand. Commander Elson organized a station sweep. We moved through hallways calling his name. We checked the snow tunnels, the labs, the generator building, the storage sheds. Nothing. Outside, visibility was clear for once, the kind of crisp day Antarctica rarely gifted us. We spread out, walking slow arcs within the perimeter lights. The snow was undisturbed except for faint wind patterns. Then Martinez found something. A glove, frozen stiff, fingers curled inward as if grasping at something in the final moment. The fabric was unmistakably Hayes's. It lay half buried in the snow 50 meters from the nearest light pole. Further out, the landscape dissolved into endless white. That's too far, Dwyer muttered. Too far for someone to walk without being seen. We radioed command. They denied permission to extend the search beyond the safe radius. This is protocol, the voice insisted. No unauthorized excursions during winter over. Visibility can deteriorate instantly. Loss of personnel is unacceptable. Elson argued, but command repeated the same cold directives. No expansion of search parameters, no exceptions. The message ended with a familiar phrase. Follow your station rules. Elson stood there holding the radio, jaw clenched hard enough to tremble. Dwyer picked up the glove with his thick gloves and stared at it like it was a bomb. He broke Rule 1, Dwyer said softly. Martinez nodded. He answered something. The wind shifted across the snow, carrying faint, brittle sounds. For a moment, it almost sounded like a voice calling from far off. We returned to the station in silence. Inside, the atmosphere had changed again, and not subtly. Doors were double-bolted, window coverings rechecked. The crew no longer walked with the slow fatigue of winter over, but with sharp alertness, every footstep decisive, every movement quiet. Even the air felt different, charged with a tension that hummed against the skin. Late afternoon, I found Dwyer in the mechanical room, sitting alone with the lights off. He held a wrench, but not for work. He turned it slowly in his hands like a prayer object. "You saw him change," he said without looking up. "What do you mean?" "Hayes," he shifted. "It always starts small," he swallowed, "and then the night gets hungry." The way he said it made my chest seize. "You think something took him?" I asked. Dwyer didn't answer. He didn't have to. I found myself thinking back to the figure in the whiteout, standing still, facing me, blank and patient. I remembered the strange breathing rhythm of the storm, the unnatural stillness around the figure. I remembered the way Hayes had stared at windows, lips moving silently, as if responding to someone standing just beyond the glass. "Rules written in blood." That phrase echoed in my mind with chilling accuracy. Someone had died for each one. Someone had vanished into the ice for the warning to exist. That night I couldn't sit still. I paced the hallways, listening to the metal creak, listening for the scrape of an airlock, listening for the phantom voice Hayes swore he heard. At one point, I stood in front of the back airlock, the same one he tried to open. Frost clung to its edges like veins. The wheel lock glistened with condensation that hadn't been there moments earlier. I stepped closer. Something shifted on the other side. Not a voice, not a knock. A subtle movement, a whisper of pressure, like a person leaning gently against the door. I stepped back quickly, breath catching. And I finally understood why everyone followed the rules without question. Because Hayes had broken one. And the ice had taken him. It happened on a night so still it felt unnatural. No wind, no groaning metal, no shifting ice. The kind of silence that made you aware of your own heartbeat, your own breathing, your own fragility. I lay in my bunk staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The image of Hayes' glove haunted me, frozen into that final desperate curl. I kept imagining him walking into the white, hearing a voice that sounded like a friend, stepping beyond the lights and vanishing into the cold. Sometime past midnight, a sound cut through the silence. A single knock. Not a bang, not a rattle, not the station settling or the pipes cooling. It was a deliberate tap against the exterior wall, sharp enough to slice through the quiet, soft enough to be intentional. Every muscle in my body locked. The lights in the hallway clicked off one by one, the old crew reacting instantly. Darkness spilled across the station with heavy purpose. Another knock came, this time from somewhere near the generator corridor. 3 seconds later, Commander Elson's voice hissed through the intercom in a whisper, only just audible. "No one move, no one speak, lights stay off." The silence after that message felt alive. I lay frozen, gripping my blanket as if it were something that could shield me. The metal structure trembled faintly, not from force, but from the resonance of something moving against it. Then the knocking changed locations. A tap behind the storage wing. A tap near the comms room. A tap beneath the ventilation ducts. Slow, patient, testing the boundaries of the structure like a blind creature mapping the shell of prey. Each knock landed after long stretches of unnerving stillness, as if whatever was outside could feel our hearts beating and wanted to time its movements between them. Footsteps followed, but not human ones. They were soft, too soft, not crunching through snow but gliding across it, bare footfalls in temperatures cold enough to freeze flesh in seconds. The sound approached my hallway and stopped. I didn't dare breathe. The floor vibrated with faint pressure, like something standing very still just outside my door. The crack beneath it glowed with moonlit snow reflection, a thin strip of silver cutting across the darkness. Then something stepped into view. Bare ankles. Pale, blurred around the edges, skin frostbitten but also impossibly smooth. No shoes, no socks, just 2 ankles and the lower edge of a leg motionless inches from the bottom of my door. My chest tightened painfully, the air left my lungs in a single shaking exhale. I didn't inhale again. The ankles didn't move, didn't shift weight, didn't tremble. They stood with the stillness of something that did not understand human posture, only imitated it. Somewhere deeper in the station, a frightened whimper escaped someone's throat. The sound cut through the silence like a broken thread. The ankles rotated slightly. Not stepped. Rotated. As if the body above them pivoted without shifting balance. Every instinct screamed at me not to look directly, not to acknowledge, not to give shape or identity to the thing standing inches away. Rule 3: do not speak to a figure whose face is obscured. But the rules never said anything about what to do when the face was invisible, only because a door stood between you and it. The figure stayed for what felt like hours. The cold crept under my door, sliding across the floor like a living shadow. Frost began forming around the metal frame, growing in thin crystalline tendrils. Still no breathing. No shifting. Nothing human. Then it happened. The ankles disappeared. Not walked away, not slid away. They simply vanished between one blink and the next, as if erased from existence. I remained still long after they were gone. The silence returned, suffocating and immense. Somewhere someone sobbed softly, someone else hissed for quiet. A door creaked as someone repositioned furniture in front of it, trying to reinforce the barrier. No one slept, not even the veterans. By 4 in the morning, the faint outline of dawn began brushing the edge of the windows, though the sky outside was still a deep blue-gray void. The station smelled like fear, sweat, cold metal, old insulation. When Commander Elson finally gave the all-clear, no one moved right away. We waited for someone else to be the first to break the stillness. Dwyer eventually stepped into the hallway with a flashlight. He looked older than he had the night before. We gathered our gear and moved outside as a group, staying within arm's reach of each other. The air was brutally cold, sharp enough to sting the lungs, but the world was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that suggested something had passed through and was now waiting somewhere unseen. We found the footprints within minutes. They circled the entire perimeter of the station, hundreds of impressions in the snow. Human-shaped but wrong in ways that made my stomach twist. Each footprint was too narrow, as if the foot had been compressed, elongated, stretched beyond natural proportions. The toes were long, almost finger-like. The heel impressions were deeper than the front, suggesting a gait that did not match any human stance. Even worse, the prints were bare. No boots, no gear, no protection against the lethal cold. How long would someone survive barefoot out here? Martinez asked, her voice barely audible. Dwyer shook his head, seconds, maybe a minute. But these prints go on for 50 meters, she said, at least. A thick silence followed. Everyone looked at the prints again, and the horror widened behind their eyes. The path wasn't random. It traced a deliberate pattern close to the walls, pausing near windows, stopping at each door, investigating, listening. Testing. Commander Elson knelt beside one footprint and touched the snow lightly. Frost clung to his glove instantly. It was here less than an hour ago, he said. My throat closed. That meant when I had seen the ankles disappear, the thing hadn't walked away into the darkness. It had remained near the station. Watching, waiting, testing new prey. That night marked a shift in everyone. The veterans no longer watched the windows, they avoided them. The new crew members stopped asking questions. Even the most skeptical among us kept their voices low and their eyes scanning corners. Because now it wasn't a story, not a rule, not a legend. Something had come knocking. And something had stood outside my door as if choosing who would be next. I tried to explain it all away. I had to. The alternative was accepting that something outside the boundaries of science moved through the dark around our station. So I did what any rational scientist would do. I investigated, quietly, carefully, desperately. At first, I focused on the weather. Whiteouts could create sound illusions. Shifting wind could mimic footsteps. Pressure differentials along metal walls could produce knocks. I charted wind speeds, temperature gradients, ice expansion rates, acoustic distortions. Every pattern I plotted fell apart. The knocks from the previous night had not matched any oscillation in the storm. The footsteps outside my door had come during perfect stillness. There was no atmospheric explanation, no trick of pressure or sound refraction, nothing. The crew avoided me more as I studied. They watched from a distance, their eyes filled with silent warnings. The veterans especially. When I asked Dwyer whether he had seen anything unusual, he simply shook his head. Do your job, follow the rules, he said. What rules? I demanded. These don't explain anything, they don't tell me what's happening. He stopped tightening the pipe he was working on and stared at me, expression hard. They tell you enough. He left before I could argue. The message was clear, stop asking. But I couldn't. I needed logic, structure, explanation. My mind couldn't accept the idea of footprints belonging to something barefoot in sub-zero temperatures, couldn't accept the image of those ankles outside my door, couldn't accept the blank-faced figure in the whiteout. So I documented everything. I wrote down every sound, every shift in the temperature, every strange flicker in the lights. I installed additional audio sensors near the back airlock. I set motion trackers near the hallways and near my own door. I checked every cable, every instrument, every power readout. The first anomaly appeared 2 nights later. I was reviewing audio logs from the storm when a faint whisper cut through the static. At first it sounded like white noise shaping itself into accidental patterns, but then the distortion sharpened into something unmistakable. My voice, calling my names. It repeated twice, soft and strained, as though speaking through cracked ice. Then the line distorted again and dissolved back into static. I froze. My hand hovered above the keyboard as the audio replayed itself in my mind. It wasn't a perfect match to my voice. It was slightly off, like someone imitating me without understanding breath or tone. I rewound the clip and isolated the frequency. The waveform was irregular, inconsistent with any known interference, and yet the cadence was familiar, too familiar. I checked the timestamp. It had been recorded at 3 in the morning. The same hour Hayes claimed to hear someone calling for him. A cold realization sank through me like a stone into deep water. It was not copying sounds. It was copying us. I decided to test the motion sensors next. I positioned them near the airlock and around the perimeter hall, careful not to draw attention. If something had been moving outside, I would catch it. The sensors malfunctioned almost immediately. Dead zones appeared at random intervals. Static floods triggered false readings. When the hallway monitors flickered, I felt a pulse of dread. The errors always aligned with certain patterns. They occurred only when I heard faint footsteps outside the station. Never before. Never after. Only durings. One night I sat by the small window near my bunk, listening to those soft steps move across the snow. My monitors lit with phantom motion only when the steps drew near the wall. As the steps paused near my corner of the station, the sensors went dark for several seconds, then rebooted without logging a single reading. It was as if something was intentionally avoiding detection. Or worse, interfering with it. When I showed the scrambled data to Elson, he stared at the printout for a long moment before handing it back. "Stop this," he said, "you are drawing attention." "I'm gathering evidence," I replied. "I'm trying to understand what we're dealing with." His expression tightened. "You are being noticed, and once it notices you, you can't undo that." "What does that mean?" I asked. He glanced down the hallway, ensuring no one else was within earshot. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "Curiosity is how it learns you." I frowned. "Learns me." Elson closed his eyes briefly, as if the words physically hurt to say. "It cannot become you unless it understands you. It listens, it studies, it mimics. The more you look for answers, the more you reveal yourself to it. Curiosity feeds it." "That doesn't make sense," I protested. "Nothing about this makes sense." "It doesn't have to," he said. "It only has to survive, and it survives by becoming something familiar to its prey." I stepped back unsettled. "So what happened to Hayes?" He became curious. Elson's face went dark. "Hayes heard a voice calling for him," he said quietly. A voice that sounded like someone he cared about. That was how it began. Once he responded, it learned his fear, his hope, his identity, and once it began learning him, it did not stop. A chill ran through my spine. "You're telling me it's trying to learn me now?" Elson didn't reply. He didn't have to. He walked away, leaving me alone in the hallway with my equipment logs and the creeping realization that my attempts to understand were not just dangerous. They were invitations. That night I didn't sleep, not because of fear, but because I couldn't stop thinking about the connection between curiosity and vulnerability. Hayes had been pulled outside by a voice imitating someone familiar. The creature had adapted to him, responded to him, become something tailored to him. What if my equipment tests were another form of communication? What if the static whisper of my own voice was the first attempt at mimicry? I replayed the recording again, this time listening more carefully. The voice sounded strained, not just imitating me but stretching toward the shape of my voice as though trying to mold itself into me. I shut off the equipment. My heartbeat drummed painfully. The crew moved differently the next morning. They avoided eye contact with me, whispered behind closed doors. I realized my search for logic had painted me as compromised, as someone too exposed, too noticed. As someone the man with no face was learning. That evening, as I sat alone in my room writing a final entry in my private log, a flicker passed across my computer monitor. A faint outline, a suggestion of a shape behind my reflection. My own reflection paused half a second longer than I did. When I turned, the room was empty. But the air felt aware of me, aware in a way that made the hairs on my arms rise, aware in a way that felt like something just beyond the walls was waiting for me to ask another question, waiting for me to look a little harder, waiting for me to reveal just one more part of myself. and then it would learn the rest on its own. The snow tunnels had always unsettled me. They were carved long before my arrival, narrow corridors hollowed out beneath the drifting layers that connected the labs to the storage sheds and generator access points. A cramped underworld of ice and stale air. Pale blue walls curved in organic shapes where the heat lamps had melted and refrozen the surfaces dozens of times, each cycle distorting the tunnels further. Some areas glistened as if glazed with glass. Others sagged inward, ready to collapse with the next tremor of temperature or weight. Still, I found myself working in them more often after the encounter with the footprints, after the voice on the audio recorder, after Elson's warning, anything to distract my mind, to occupy my hands, to force myself into routine. As long as I was working, I could pretend everything made sense. Work was a shield, thin but necessary. I entered the tunnels one afternoon with a small toolkit and a list of maintenance tasks. Several heat lamps needed recalibration. A few sensors in the tunnel intersections had stopped transmitting. Harmless problems on paper, but nothing felt harmless anymore. The deeper I went, the darker the air became. The only illumination came from the low-mounted lamps that cast weak pools of bluish light against the walls. The shadows they created stretched long and warped, bending against the curves of the tunnel. The cold felt thicker down there, heavier, the kind of cold that pressed against your eardrums and made the walls seem closer than they were. I began adjusting the first lamp, tightening a bolt when I heard it. A scraping sound. Soft at first, barely there, like fingertips dragging across a frosted window, slow, deliberate. I froze, wrench in hand, and listened. Another scrape. This one longer, a sound of something rough sliding across ice, not an animal, not wind. Wind didn't move like that in enclosed tunnels, and no one else had entered behind me. I would have heard them. I shone my flashlight down the length of the tunnel. The beam cut through suspended dust and ice crystals, illuminating the tight corridor. Empty. Completely empty. The scrape came again, this time from behind me. I spun, pressing my back to the wall. Nothing moved. The passage behind me shimmered in the faint blue light, narrowing into shadow. "Hello," I whispered before I even realized I'd spoken. My breath fogged heavily. The silence answered me, thick and absolute. I told myself to keep working, to ignore the sounds, to treat them like structural shifts. But my hands shook. My pulse hammered so hard I felt it in my teeth. I continued down the tunnel, needing to reach the next junction. The air felt wrong, too cold, too still. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, bouncing off the icy curves like they belonged to someone walking behind me. Halfway to the junction, I heard a shuffle, a soft displacement of weight. I turned. Still nothing. But the tunnel felt occupied now, the way an empty room changes when someone steps inside it, the way air tightens around presence. The scraping returned, closer this time, directly behind me. I spun again, but the tunnel remained empty. My throat tightened. I backed away slowly, turning toward the junction. The air seemed to shift, carrying a faint shiver of movement I couldn't see. As I neared the intersection, a shadow moved at the corner of my vision. A silhouette. Tall, too tall, nearly brushing the ceiling. It stepped into the blue glow at the far end of the tunnel, blocking the faint light behind it. My pulse stopped. The figure stood perfectly still. No swaying, no breathing, no movement at all. Its shape was humanoid only in the vaguest sense. Shoulders sloped at unnatural angles, arms longer than they should be. Its head tilted slightly, the same angle I had seen outside in the whiteout. I tried not to look at its face, but my eyes betrayed me. Its face was smooth, featureless, a blank sheen of pale, reflective skin that caught the dim light and twisted it into sickening distortions. A face that didn't understand anatomy, a face that wanted to imitate one but had no frame of reference. My breath stuttered in my chest, my legs locked. Every primal part of me screamed to stay silent. The creature didn't move. It just stood there, studying me without eyes, absorbing me, learning me. The tunnel felt too small, too confined. The walls seemed to pulse as if breathing with it. The air tasted metallic, thick with cold that settled into my bones. It shifted its head again, slightly, a gesture so minute it was almost gentle. Then it stepped forward. One slow, gliding movement. I stumbled back, my flashlight clattered to the floor, spinning light across the ceiling. Shadows warped and twisted across the curved ice. The creature took another step. Not fast, not aggressive, but purposeful, certain. I felt the weight of it pressing on me, a presence more intense than anything I had felt in my life. Not a predator, not a ghost, something older, something patient, something that did not need to hurry because it had all the time in the world to understand the shape of prey. I turned and ran. My boots slipped on the icy floor. My breath tore out in freezing bursts that stung my throat. Behind me, silence followed, no footsteps, no scraping, no chase. Just silence. The worst sound of all. My chest ached as I sprinted toward the maintenance hatch near the emergency exit. My hands fumbled for the latch. The metal felt brittle under my gloves as if it might snap. The tunnel behind me seemed to darken, swallowing what little light remained. I yanked the hatch open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut. The impact reverberated through the metal like a cannon shot. I locked both bolts with shaking hands. Then I collapsed against the wall, trembling so violently I could barely keep my teeth from clattering. For a long time I sat listening. Silence. Not even the faintest sound of movement on the other side of the hatch. Eventually the crew found me. They pried the hatch open and dragged me into the warm hallway. My legs barely held me. My words came out fractured and scattered. But the moment I mentioned what I had seen, every face hardened. Elson knelt beside me. "You didn't speak to it, did you?" he asked. I shook my head. A collective exhale passed through the crew, one of grim relief. "Seal the tunnels," Elson ordered. "Now weld them if you have to. No one goes down there until spring." Martinez helped me stand, her hands firm but shaking. "You survived," she whispered, "because you stayed silent. If you had spoken, it would have answered." Her words cut through me like a blade. Because in the tunnels, for one split second, I had wanted to speak. To ask what it wanted. To ask what it was. And in that moment, it had leaned forward slightly, as if waiting. As if listening. As if ready to learn the next part of me. Commander Elson asked to speak with me privately the evening after the tunnels were sealed. His voice carried none of the hardness he usually wore. Instead, it held something quieter, something brittle. The kind of tone a person uses when they're about to reveal something they swore they never would. He led me to the old meteorology office, a narrow room with scratched floors and a single small window that had long been taped over. The heating inside was weak, leaving the air cold enough to feel against my teeth. Elson locked the door behind us, then sat heavily at the edge of a desk. For several minutes, he said nothing. His hands shook. Not subtly, not the small tremors of exhaustion or age. They shook with the weight of something he had carried for far too long. "This is my 5th winter over," he finally said, staring at the floor. "And every year I tell myself I won't do this again, that I won't lead another team into the dark, that I won't watch it choose someone, that I won't lose more people." He rubbed his face, his fingers trembling at his temples. "But I always come back," he whispered. "Someone has to." I swallowed, bracing myself. "Elson," I said quietly, "I need to know what's happening." He lifted his eyes, they looked hollowed out, like something had been scooped from behind them. "You already know more than most," he said. "You've seen it, you've heard it, you understand the rules better than you think. But the rules don't explain what it is." His jaw tightened. "No," he said, "they don't, because there's no explanation that fits into anything the human mind understands." He took a long, shaky breath. "It is not a spirit, and it's not a hallucination. The man with no face is not a story or a myth or some superstition passed down through crews trying to scare the new guys." He leaned forward. "It is real." The cold in the room deepened, not from temperature, from the truth settling like ice in my blood. "What is it?" I asked. Elson looked toward the taped window, as if expecting something to be listening on the other side. "It's something ancient," he whispered. "Older than the ice, older than the continent, some say older than human identity itself. It moves through whiteout, through darkness, through reflection." He tapped the window lightly. "It can use surfaces like this. Mirrors, screens, frozen panes, anything that holds an outline, anything that can distort a shape." I felt a pulse of memory, the way my reflection had lagged behind me in the monitor, the shape behind me that hadn't belonged. "It mimics posture first," Elson continued. "The way a person stands, the tilt of their head, the rhythm of their breathing." His eyes flicked to mine. "You were in the tunnels, you saw what it can imitate." The nauseating smooth face, the reflective skin, the wrongness wearing the shape of a man. I nodded. "It doesn't start that clear," he said. "For most, it begins with sound, footsteps when no one is there, shifts of weight outside your door, a voice that shouldn't exist." My stomach dropped. "My voice," I whispered, "on the audio recorder." Elson's expression confirmed everything. When you hear yourself calling for help, he said softly, that's when it has begun to learn you. A deep stillness swallowed the room, dense enough to crush breath. Why does it learn? I asked. He hesitated before answering, his voice lowered until it was barely above a whisper. Because it lacks identity, he said. It has no face of its own, no form, no voice, no self. It exists as a reflection without an origin, so it tries to borrow yours. And the more you acknowledge it, the more you look for it, the more you listen to it, the more of you it understands. He looked down at his shaking hands. It approaches when someone feels isolated, when someone begins to question reality, when someone is curious enough to search for answers rather than follow the rules. A cold wave washed through me. Like haze, I said. Elson closed his eyes. Yes, he whispered. Hayes isolated himself, he listened, he responded, and once he acknowledged it, it became interested in him. The image of Hayes opening the airlock at 2 in the morning stabbed into my memory. He said he heard Thompson calling, I murmured. Elson's voice hardened in sorrow. It was Thompson, it was never Thompson, it was something wearing his voice like a coat. I felt sick. And once he answered, Elson continued, it learned enough of him to finish the job. My throat tightened. What jobs? I asked, though part of me already knew. It scavenges identity, Elson said. Every winter it studies us, tests us, chooses someone who listens, someone who questions, someone who responds. Someone who speaks, I whispered. Oh yes. I looked away, trying to steady my breathing. Elson, why did it start early this year? His silence answered before his words did. Because it chose early, he said. Because something drew its attention sooner than usual. Curiosity, data, observation, you're a scientist. You try to understand what doesn't want to be understood, it feels that. His gaze fixed on me with quiet dread. And it has learned more of you than you realize. My pulse hammered painfully. What does that mean? I whispered. Elson shook his head slowly. It means the more you resist believing, the more you search for logic, the more of yourself you give away. And once it learns enough, it doesn't stop. He looked at me with broken honesty. That's why the rules exist. They're not warnings, they are defenses. They are the only ways we've learned to survive, and even then they fail more often than they should. The cold in the room thickened again, pressing against the walls. I felt something shift inside me, a crack, a fracture where denial had lived. Fear seeped into its place. Elson, I said quietly, is there any way to stop it? His expression told me everything. No, he said, there is only surviving long enough that it loses interest. But what if it doesn't lose interest? He lowered his gaze. Then winter takes another soul. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Somewhere outside the office, the station groaned against the shifting ice. A distant clatter echoed through a hallway, a door slammed shut. Elson's eyes flicked toward the noise, then back to me. This time, he whispered, it started early. The comms room was one of the only places in the station that didn't feel suffocating. The soft blinking lights, the steady hum of equipment, the faint warmth radiating from the consoles all created an illusion of safety. A thin, fragile illusion, but one I clung to. Out there was endless ice, endless dark. In here, technology still obeyed, logic still existed. Machines did not mimic footsteps or whisper from the walls. I was calibrating the shortwave receiver, adjusting the bandwidth on a routine check, when the interference began. A faint hiss, a burst of static, then silence. I leaned closer, adjusting the dial slightly. Static again. Then layered beneath it, something that froze every drop of blood in my body. My voice. Help. I stiffened. The whisper crackled through the speaker, distant and fractured, like someone speaking while shivering to death. Open the hatch, please, open it. My throat closed. I was standing right there in the room, breathing, warm, alive. But the voice coming through the radio was me, not just similar, not approximate. It matched my cadence, my weakness, the slight rasp when I was tired. Except this version was gasping, struggling for air, choking on cold. As if I were outside the station. As if I were freezing. As if I were dying. I stepped back from the console, heart pounding so hard I felt it shaking in my ribs. The voice continued, broken by static. I'm so cold, let me in. My lungs didn't want to work. My vision blurred for a moment, then sharpened too much. The room felt tilted, wrong, like gravity shifted only beneath me. I forced myself to speak, barely managing a whisper. That's not me. The voice on the radio stuttered with static. Please let me inside. No one else was in the comms room. No one could be transmitting from inside the station. The outgoing channel wasn't active. The receiver was locked to an emergency frequency with no local repeaters. This was impossible. My fingers trembled as I reached for the power switch. Before I could touch it, the door slammed open. Commander Elson rushed in, eyes wide with a panic I had never seen on him before. He shoved past me, grabbed the main power cutoff for the comms board and yanked it down. The equipment snapped into dead silence. The monitors dimmed. The abrupt quiet was somehow worse than the voice. Elson turned slowly toward me. He wasn't angry. He was afraid. Did you respond? He asked. I shook my head, unable to force words out. Did you say anything to it? He demanded. No, I finally whispered. I didn't. He exhaled shakily, bracing himself against the desk. That was stage 2. The words dropped like ice into the room. My breath fogged in the cold air from the door left open behind him. Elson, I said. It was my voice. He nodded once slowly, his hands were trembling again. It has learned enough of you to speak with your throat, he said. Your tone, your fear, your breath patterns. I sank onto the nearest chair. The floor seemed to ripple beneath me. This isn't mimicry anymore, he continued. It's progression. My voice begging to be let inside. The thought made my stomach twist. Stage 2 means it has established familiarity, Elson said. It can imitate. It can create more accurate reflections. It knows how you sound now, even when you are terrified. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. You must not respond, not ever. Not even if you think someone is injured or trapped outside. Not even if you hear your own voice calling in pain. Once you respond, you acknowledge it. And if I acknowledge it? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Elson closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with hollow resignation. Then you invite it. The silence that followed was suffocating, pressing against the sides of my skull like a physical weight. Elson, I whispered, if it can sound like me, does that mean it can become me? His expression didn't change, but something in him broke. Yes, he said, that's exactly what stage 3 is. My body locked in place. Don't let it get there, he continued. Don't speak back, don't acknowledge any version of yourself that isn't you. He moved toward the comms panel again, checking the dials even though they were without power. It chose early this year, he muttered, much too early. My mouth felt dry. How many times has this happened? I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached out and closed the door gently, as if afraid a loud sound might draw something's attention. It always begins the same way, he said softly. Footsteps, then knocks, then voices. It studies, it gathers pieces, it imitates poorly at first, then better, then perfectly. And after that, I asked. He met my eyes with a sorrow that chilled me deeper than the cold ever had. After that, it takes what it has learned, and what it has learned becomes its new shape. A tremor ran down my spine. My mind flashed to the figure in the whiteout, the smooth face, the tilt of the head, the way it had stood studying me, waiting. Elson, I whispered, what if it already knows too much? His silence was answer enough. A faint thud echoed somewhere outside the room, not a knock, not a footstep, a pressure shifting through the metal structure, something moving. Elson straightened. From now on, he said, you keep to populated areas. You do not go outside alone. You do not go into dark spaces. You avoid reflective surfaces. And if you hear your own voice again, you run. What if it calls my name? I asked. It will, he said. What if it sounds like me? It will. What if it cries? It will. The lights flickered overhead, dimming for half a second before stabilizing. Elson turned pale. It's close, he whispered. I felt the cold deepen around my ankles, seeping upward like frost-climbing bone. Elson, I said, barely audible, what do I do? He stepped toward the door, listening. You survive, he whispered, and you pray it grows bored of you before it perfects you. The hallway outside creaked. Something shifted in the ventilation ducts, something slow, something patient. Something learning. And I realized with nauseating certainty that it wasn't trying to sound like me to trick me. It was practicing. It happened at dawn, though dawn in Antarctica during deep winter was hardly dawn at all. More like a thin suggestion of light, a faint bluish smear along the horizon that gave shape to the world without illuminating it. Most of us were gathered in the cafeteria, pretending to eat breakfast, pretending to rest, pretending not to fear the coming hours. The exhaustion hung over the crew like a fog heavier than any storm. Then Martinez froze at the window. Her spoon clattered onto the table. "Movement," she whispered. Every head turned. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the heating vents. We approached the window slowly, as if moving too fast might shatter whatever fragile reality held the station together. Frost ringed the glass in intricate patterns, but through the gaps we could see the faint halo cast by the perimeter lights. A shape stood just beyond the glow. At first it looked like a shadow, still, unmoving. The wind carried thin ribbons of snow past it, but it remained anchored, unaffected. Dwyer swore under his breath. "Impossible," he murmured. But it wasn't impossible. It was haze. Or the shape of haze. He stood with his arms slack at his sides, shirt torn open at the chest, frost clinging to his eyebrows and hair. His skin looked stretched, pulled tight over bone, pale enough to be translucent. His eyes appeared dark from this distance, but as he stepped closer into the perimeter light, I realized it wasn't darkness. There were no eyes. Just smooth skin where his features should have been. A cold spike pierced the back of my skull. The others stumbled backward from the window, breaths catching, hands shaking. Martinez covered her mouth. Dwyer turned away entirely, unable to look. But I stared. Not because of morbid curiosity, but because something inside me recognized the shape before my mind could reject it. Something instinctive, something buried deep. Hayes took another step forward, slow and unnatural. His boots left no sound in the snow, as if he were gliding rather than walking. His shoulders were slightly misaligned and his head tilted at that familiar degree, the same tilt I had seen in the whiteout. The same angle the thing in the tunnel had used. It was Hayes. It was wearing him. The creature had learned his posture, his breath rhythm, his height, his outline, but it hadn't learned his face yet. That blank surface rippled faintly when the wind moved across it, like skin untreated by the rules of nature. "He came back," someone whispered. "No," Dwyer said, "that's not him." Hayes, or the thing wearing his form, moved closer until he stood directly against the glass. Frost cracked under the pressure of his proximity. Then he lifted his hand. Bare fingers tapped once. A single knock. Sharp, deliberate, perfectly timed. The entire crew recoiled. Chairs scraped. Someone dropped a tray with a metallic crash. Even Commander Elson flinched as if the sound had struck him physically. "No one move," Elson said. "Do not speak, do not get close." But Hayes didn't look at them. He turned his head. Toward me. The movement was impossibly smooth, like a hinge turning without friction. His face, blank, rippling, devoid of human structure, angled in my direction. I felt something tighten behind my eyes, a strange inward pressure, as if someone were gently pushing their thumb against my mind. My breath hitched. It recognized me. And the recognition wasn't visual. It wasn't the way a person recognizes a friend. It was deeper, a resonance. As if something inside that blank face knew my voice, my footsteps, my fear. As if it had been practicing. My knees weakened. A magnetic pull rose in my chest, drawing me toward the window. My hand lifted involuntarily, as if responding to a silent invitation. No, Elson snapped, grabbing my arm, back away. But I couldn't move. My body leaned forward instinctively, drawn like prey recognizing its predator. Dwyer appeared beside me, gripping my other arm, pulling hard. "Don't look at it," he yelled. But I did. And Hayes, if I could still call it that, tilted its head 1 degree further, as if pleased. The pressure tightened behind my skull, my vision blurred at the edges. Something whispered in the back of my consciousness, familiar, soft, a mimic trace of my own internal voice. "Come outside." The thought wasn't mine. I jerked back violently, stumbling into a table. The moment my gaze broke, the pressure vanished, leaving a ringing emptiness in my head like the echo of a vacuum. The others herded me away from the window, creating a barrier between me and the glass. Their faces were pale, tight with fear. "Elson," I gasped. It looked at me. He shook his head, already pale. "It didn't look at you," he corrected. "It recognized you." The difference made my stomach twist. Hayes didn't move after that. He stood there, motionless in the cold, body rigid, arms slack, the blank rippling face reflecting the faint perimeter lights. He didn't knock again, he didn't gesture, he didn't attempt to speak. He simply waited. Hours passed. The light outside grew dim again, then faded completely. The weak hint of dawn that had allowed us to see him receded into polar night. The cold deepened until the glass frosted solid. But Hayes didn't leave. He remained at the window long after we retreated to the inner corridors. Whenever I passed the cafeteria, even from down the hall, I felt a faint pull, an invisible thread linking me to the darkness on the other side of the wall. At one point, I made the mistake of returning alone, drifting toward the cafeteria door with no intention of entering. My steps slowed. My hand hovered near the frame. "Move," Dwyer said behind me, grabbing my shoulder. "Don't let it make choices for you." I let him pull me away, legs shaking. By late afternoon, the others avoided the cafeteria entirely. Even the veterans wouldn't look toward the window. Commander Elson stood guard near the hallway, watching me more than watching the outside. At one point, Martinez whispered, "How long will it stay?" Elson answered without turning his head. "Until the light fails." As if on cue, the last traces of illumination slipped behind the horizon. The station lights flickered weakly, leaving everything submerged in dim orange glow. When full darkness settled, Dwyer crept to the cafeteria doorway and peered inside, not out the window, just into the room. His shoulders relaxed slightly. "It's gone," he said. No one cheered, no one sighed in relief. The silence remained solid and heavy. Because we all knew what it meant. Hayes, or the thing wearing him, had not left because it gave up. It had left because night had come. And night was its domain. That evening, Elson pulled me aside. His gaze was weary, haunted. "It is interested in you," he said, more quickly than it should be. My voice shook. "Why me?" He looked toward the dark windows. "Because you're questioning, because you're afraid, because it already has your voice and now it wants your shape." My heart pounded. "Is there anything I can do?" I asked. Elson placed a hand on my shoulder. "Yes," he said, "stay away from the glass, stay away from the doors, and under no circumstances ever answer yourself." He left me standing alone in the hallway, the cold sinking deeper into my bones. Somewhere outside, the darkness shifted. Not wind, not ice, something moving, something learning. And I knew with a heaviness beyond fear that Hayes had not come back to haunt us. He had come back to show me what I would become. The station began to fracture after Hayes's return. The tension didn't rise gradually. It broke like a bone snapping clean under pressure. One moment we were barely holding together, the next we were split down the middle, two camps forming without discussion. The first group insisted we contact command immediately. They argued that even if a rescue plane couldn't land until spring, we could at least warn the outside world and request emergency intervention. They believed humanity would find a solution. They believed the threat could be confronted. The second group, led by several veterans, argued that any transmission might draw attention from the thing wearing Hayes's form. They spoke in hushed tones about past seasons, about transmissions that had triggered knockings and disappearances, about the creature listening through frequencies the same way it listened through reflective surfaces. They said reaching out was a signal, a beacon, a lure. "No more broadcasts," Dwyer insisted. "You call for help and you tell it exactly where to look." But the opposing group fought just as fiercely. "If we don't reach someone now," Martinez snapped, "we're all dead before winter ends." "We're dead if we make contact," someone fired back. It didn't stay verbal. One night, the shouting erupted so loudly it shook me from an already shallow sleep. I stepped into the hallway to find two researchers pushing each other, elbows slamming against metal walls, hot breath condensing into frantic clouds. Elson separated them, his voice low but sharp enough to slice the tension. But the damage was done. The fragile unity we'd clung to shattered. Supplies worsened everything. Our food stores had been calculated for a stable crew, but fear made everyone eat at odd hours. People snuck into the kitchen for midnight snacks because they could not sleep. Others barely ate at all. Rations diminished faster than the logs predicted. Exhaustion hollowed us out. People began falling asleep in hallways, in labs, sometimes standing upright. The wind outside scraped across the metal siding in long, rasping strokes, as if something were dragging its fingers along the walls. I slept less than anyone. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Hayes's blank face bending toward the window, that slight tilt, that rippling non-skin, that familiarity. Worse than the dreams were the reflections. It started near the cafeteria when I saw a glint in the microwave door while walking past. My reflection lingered half a second too long after my head turned away. I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of tired eyes. But then it happened again in the med bay sink. And again in a dark window where frost spiderwebbed the edges. And again in a powered-off monitor in the comms room. Each time the reflection matched me but late, delayed watching. The worst part was the eyes. They weren't blank. They were mines. Just slightly wrong, slightly wider, slightly more curious than my real expression. I stopped looking at anything reflective. But the reflections didn't stop looking at me. The crew began noticing my behavior. They whispered when I walked past, stopped conversations abruptly when I entered rooms. Their eyes hovered on me longer than they should have. Fear is contagious, and I was showing symptoms no one wanted to acknowledge. I overheard a conversation one night near the storage wing. Martinez and two others stood near the shelves, speaking in low tones. "He's compromised," Martinez said. It looked at him, it recognized him. He heard his own voice, someone else said. "Stage 2, right? That's what Elson called it." "We don't know what that means," Martinez snapped. "We know enough," the third voice replied. "He can't be left alone, he can't have access to the comms. We should confine him for everyone's safety." My heart hammered so loudly I thought they would hear it. The word confine echoed in my skull like a verdict. I stepped back quietly, my breath shallow, and retreated before they noticed me. But even as I walked away, I felt something else noticing me. Every hallway felt narrower than before. Every shadow seemed deeper. The air felt charged, vibrating faintly with awareness. I felt watched even when I was alone, especially when I was alone. I tried telling myself it was paranoia caused by stress and sleep deprivation. But the sensation remained, like cold fingers brushing the back of my neck whenever I stopped moving. Late one night, I sat at my desk, staring at a blank page in my private log. The pen shook between my fingers. I wanted to write everything down, every whisper, every reflection, every shifting shadow, but the words wouldn't come. I felt the presence before I heard it. A faint pressure in the air, a change in temperature, the sensation of something leaning near the door. I turned my head slowly. The lights in the hallway flickered, casting long, shifting shadows across the floor. One of those shadows lingered. Longer. A tall silhouette, thin still. I blinked. It vanished. My breath broke in a sharp gasp. My hands trembled uncontrollably. When I stood, the room tilted. Exhaustion and terror knotted together inside me. I pressed my palms against the desk and took slow breaths, trying to steady myself. Maybe I should tell Elson, maybe I should admit what I was seeing. But the moment I pictured saying it aloud, the moment I imagined describing the reflections, the shadows, the presence, I felt watched again, observed, as if speaking about it would invite it closer. As if acknowledging it would finish a connection it was waiting for. I left the room and walked through the dark hallway, passing reflective surfaces without looking into them. The station moaned softly as the wind outside shifted. Somewhere distant, a door creaked open, then slammed shut. Whether it was the wind or something else, I couldn't tell. In the rec room, some of the crew were whispering heatedly. "We can't wait anymore," one argued. "We need outside intervention." "No," another shot back. "No transmissions, you don't understand what that will bring toward us. What's already here is worse." Elson stood apart from them, face gaunt, eyes sunken, listening without intervening. He looked older than he had a week ago, older even than the ice around us. When he saw me, something in his expression shifted, concern, pity, dread. He approached slowly. "You aren't sleeping," he said quietly. "I see things," I whispered. His jaw tightened. "Reflections?" he asked. I didn't answer, I didn't have to. He exhaled in resignation. "It's close to you," he said, "closer than I hoped." A chill crawled up my spine. "Elson," I said, "am I becoming like Hayes?" "No," he said firmly, "not yet, you can still fight it." "But the crew," I started. "Are afraid," he finished. "Fear does not decide your fate, it decides theirs." He placed a hand on my shoulder. "You must hold on to what is real. Do not acknowledge anything in the reflections. Do not respond to any version of yourself that is not you. Do not break." His hand tightened slightly. "Do you understand?" I nodded, though fear made the motion weak. When I left the rec room, the isolation pressed harder than it ever had. Every corridor felt stretched. Every shadow felt inhabited. Every surface felt ready to reflect a version of me I didn't want to meet. The man with no face was no longer outside the station. It was moving inside the cracks of my perception. And every time I blinked, I feared the world would open on the other side of my eyelids to a face shaped exactly like mine, just slightly too smooth, slightly too curious, slightly too wrong. And waitings. Desperation changes people. It hollows them out, twists logic into a shape that feels like hope. By the 12th week of winter, hope had become a scarce resource. Fear, on the other hand, had grown unchecked. It filled every hallway, every breath, every movement of the crew. You could see it in the way they avoided windows, in the way they whispered instead of speaking, in the way no one lingered alone for more than a few seconds. And you could see it most clearly in the plan they formed without Elson's approval. "We kill it," Martinez said, "or we die waiting." No one corrected her, not because she was right, but because everyone was too terrified to disagree. The creature still wearing Hayes's shape had been circling the station for days, appearing at windows, standing motionless near outbuildings, always watching, always listening. Its presence saturated the air like a sickness. The veterans warned against engaging it. "It doesn't follow the laws of this place," Dwyer insisted. "It isn't a predator you can trap, it isn't a thing you can hurt." But Martinez and the others had reached breaking point. Fear makes people reckless, fear makes people courageous. Sometimes the two are indistinguishable. They chose the fuel depot as the trap site, a metal outbuilding storing enough volatile liquid to turn half the station into debris if handled improperly. The plan was simple. Lure the creature near the tanks. Ignite the fuel. Incinerate whatever walked out wearing Hayes's face. I watched them prepare from a distance, torn between horror and a small, desperate flicker of misguided hope. Maybe the rules could be broken, maybe the creature wasn't invincible. Maybe fire, one of the oldest weapons humanity knew, could do what nothing else had. Elson confronted them briefly. "This is suicide," he said coldly. Martinez shook her head, so was doing nothing. One by one, other crew members aligned with her, exhausted, trembling, hollow-eyed but determined. Elson turned to me, his voice low. "If you go with them, it will learn even more of you." "I'm not going," I whispered, "but I'm not stopping them." He nodded, though the sadness in his eyes felt like a confession, as if he knew the decision had already been made long before the plan existed. Night fell hard. The air outside froze into a brittle silence. The perimeter lights flickered against the dark like failing stars. We split into two groups, the bait and the watchers. Martinez, Gyro, and Tanaka stepped into the snow wearing insulated gear and carrying portable lanterns. Their breaths came out in long, shivering clouds. The rest of us pressed against the windows, watching from the shadows inside the station. "Hayes," Martinez shouted into the dark. Her voice cracked the silence like a whip. The sound echoed across hard ice, distant and hollow. "Hayes, come inside," she called again. "Please, we're cold." A terrible quiet settled. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. Then movement. A tall silhouette stepped into the amber glow of the perimeter lights, shoulders slumped, head tilted, a face that wasn't a face rippling faintly in the night. The creature moved toward the lanterns. Slow, graceful, wrong. Martinez's hand shook, but she held her lantern steady and backed away, leading it toward the depot. Gyro whispered something I couldn't hear, and Tanaka tightened his grip on the ignition trigger. The shape followed without hesitation. It walked like Hayes, it carried his outline, it mimicked the rhythm of his old gait, but its feet made no sound in the snow. No prints, no weight, no presence the way a human body carried presence. It was an imitation, not yet perfected. The trap was set. Martinez reached the depot, stepped behind the outer tanks and flicked her lantern off. Darkness swallowed her. The creature paused, its head angled sharply, sensing her. Tanaka didn't wait. He pulled the ignition. There was a roar, deafening and violent. Flames detonated upward into a towering column that lit the sky in monstrous orange. The tanks ruptured in controlled bursts, sending shockwaves through the ice. Heat slammed into the station windows, fogging them instantly. I stumbled backward, shielding my face. For a long moment, all I could see was fire. Liquid flames poured across the ground, melting snow into steaming pits. Smoke churned and twisted into the sky. "Did we get it?" someone whispered behind me. "No," Dwyer said, voice trembling. No, look." The smoke parted. Something walked out. Not runnings, not crawlings. Walking. Its silhouette rose through the smoke like a shadow being born. The flames curled around it, not burning it, not touching it, bending unnaturally as if repelled by its presence. The fire distorted around its figure, deflecting away as though an invisible barrier kept it untouched. My breath vanished from my lungs. It stepped fully into view. The shape of Hayes's body blackened around the edges but not burned. Skin stretched even tighter than before, shimmering faintly under the fire's reflection. The blank face looked smoother, more defined, as if the creature had practiced the structure but still lacked details. When it turned toward us, the windows fogged further from the pressure of its attention. "Get away from the glass," Elson barked. "Now." But I couldn't move, my legs refused to obey. The creature's faceless gaze locked onto me through layers of smoke, ice, and reinforced glass. Even without eyes, the weight of its focus crushed the air around me. I felt it studying me, peeling back layers of fear, examining the shape of my thoughts. Two crew members, Fox and Ritter, panicked. They bolted out of the cafeteria, rushing into the night opposite the creature. They didn't stop for gear, they didn't look back. "Come back," Martinez screamed. But they kept running, their figures shrinking into the darkness, swallowed by the endless white. We never saw them again. The creature responded not to them but to their fear. It tilted its head, almost curious, almost satisfied. Martinez staggered back from the window, horrified. "We didn't stop it," she whispered. "We made it stronger." Elson nodded grimly. "It adapts. It learns from attempts to destroy it. You fed it more than you harmed it." The crew stared at him in disbelief. "Fire didn't burn it," Gyro stammered. "Fire can't touch something that doesn't belong to the physical world," Elson replied. "You don't fight reflections with weapons, you fight them with ignorance, with distance, with silence." I turned to him slowly. "So what do we do now?" Elson's voice cracked as he answered. "Now we survive the night." We backed away from the windows, one by one. Outside, the creature took a single step forward, not toward the fleeing crew, not toward the depot, but toward the station. Toward me. It paused at the edge of the fire's dying glow, standing unnaturally tall, its head still tilted in that same human but not human angle. "Waiting, learning, becoming." And in that moment, I understood something that froze the marrow inside me. It wasn't just imitating Hayes anymore. It had begun shaping itself using what it knew of me. I woke to the sensation of weight on the mattress. Not the shifting tug of blankets or the slight dip of fabric when you turn in your sleep. This was the unmistakable heaviness of a human body settling beside me, a deliberate presence, a shape bending the mattress inward so close that the curve of it touched my hip. My eyes snapped open. The room was dark, lit only by the faintest spill of orange from the emergency light in the hallway. The shadows stretched long and thin across the ceiling, trembling faintly with each pulse of failing electricity. My breath stuck in my throat, caught between inhale and terror. Something was sitting next to me. A tall silhouette hunched over, shoulders sloped forward like a person resting or grieving. Its back rose and fell in slow, unnatural motions that weren't breaths but imitations of them, performed in rhythm but lacking the depth of life. For a moment I couldn't move. My muscles refused commands. My mind screamed but my body stayed frozen, pinned by fear more complete than anything I had felt since arriving on this continent. Its head turned. Slowly, gently, as if giving me time to prepare for the sight. And then I saw its face, or the place where a face should have been. Smooth, pale, slightly reflective, like frost over a pane of glass. No eyes, yet the pressure of a gaze. No mouth, yet I felt breathless in its presence. No features whatsoever, yet the shape carried the echo of someone trying to remember what a human should look like. It leaned closer. My lungs seized. Cold flooded my chest, a cold sharper than the outside air, a cold that pierced from the inside out. The temperature in the room dropped so fast I saw my breath plume in the darkness. The creature tilted its head, copying the angle a curious person might make while studying another's sleeping face. A faint whisper rose from somewhere deep within its blank surface. "My name," but not my name spoken correctly, my name shaped by something that didn't fully understand sound. Soft, trembling, childlike, as if it were trying to learn the structure of my voice from scratch. It repeated my name again. Then again. Each repetition clearer, closer to my real voice. My skin burned with cold as I listened. Every instinct screamed at me to respond, to scream, to run, to cry, to do anything except lie motionless under its gaze. But the rules pounded through my skull, frantic, desperate. Do not speak to a figure whose face is obscured. Do not acknowledge it. Do not answer yourself. I clamped my teeth shut so hard my jaw ached. The creature leaned even closer. Its head hovered inches above mine, as if searching for something in the rhythm of my heartbeat, the air of my breath, the shape of my silence. The cold radiating from its form sank through the blankets, through the mattress, into my bones. Frost formed in the fibers of my pillow, creeping outward in delicate fractal patterns. My heart hammered too loudly. I feared the sound itself would reveal something to it. I forced myself to breathe shallowly, slowly, each inhale a trembling fight against panic. The whisper changed pitch. It spoke my name again, now nearly perfect. My voice stolen and returned, dripping with wrongness. Hearing yourself spoken back to you by something that is human does something to the mind. It unravels the thread of identity. It peels back the boundary between self and reflection. Still, I did not answer. I don't know how long it sat there. Minutes certainly, maybe hours. Time stretched into a tight, suffocating coil. The room grew colder until the air felt as thin as glass. My fingers numbed, my face prickled with icy needles, my breath fogged heavily with every exhale. The creature tilted its head again. This time the angle was sharper. Assessing, listening, waiting. It whispered my name one last time, the sound faltering at the end like an unfinished thought. Then with a slow, deliberate motion, it straightened its spine. The weight lifted from the mattress in a single fluid rise. The blankets hardly shifted. The air barely stirred. The creature stood tall, impossibly tall in the cramped room, and turned toward the door. It didn't walk. It simply moved. A glide, a transition, a shift from one position to another without any intermediate steps. No sound, no friction, no physicality that made sense. The door did not open. It didn't need to. The shape dissolved into the darkness beyond the frame, as though the room itself had exhaled it into the corridor. I lay frozen long after it vanished. My breath came back in sharp bursts, painful and shallow. The cold remained, pooling over my bed like a lingering shadow. Frost coated my pillowcase in a thin crystalline layer. My eyelashes felt crusted with ice when I blinked. When I finally forced myself to sit up, my entire body trembled uncontrollably. My sheets crackled faintly, the fabric stiffened by frost. I pressed a hand against my chest. My heart felt bruised. My breath rasped against my throat. It took minutes before I could stand, and even then my legs shook so violently I had to brace myself against the wall. Hours passed before my breathing returned to anything near normal. Even then, the cold inside me didn't fully leave. It clung to my ribs. It clung to my thoughts. And worst of all, it clung to my name. Because the creature had whispered it not as an imitation, but as if claiming it. As if it had taken one more piece of me into itself. The station began to die slowly at first, then all at once. A flicker in the lights one evening, a sputter in the heating vents, a brief surge in the generator output, small anomalies the veterans recognized instantly. They exchanged glances they thought I didn't notice. Quiet, grim glances that said the same thing. It's starting. By the fifth night after the creature sat beside my bed, the power failures became impossible to ignore. The lights dimmed in long, pulsing waves, bright, dark, like the station itself was breathing raggedly through damaged lungs. The hum of electricity became uneven, strained, as if forced through failing veins. Then the doors began to malfunction. Not jam, not freeze, they simply stopped responding to commands. Pressing the button did nothing. Tugging the manual lever did nothing. Some doors locked themselves. Others drifted open without sound, swaying slightly as if pushed by an invisible hand. A storm raged outside, hammering the walls with a relentless roar, not the rhythmic howl of normal blizzards. This storm shrieked with an almost conscious rage. The wind slammed against the station like fists. Snow hissed along the metal siding, accumulating in thick drifts that made the windows darken into patches of choking white. Sleep became impossible. Rest became suicidal. Every corridor was filled with the creak and groan of metal under siege. And then it started walking inside. The creature no longer lingered outside the perimeter lights, no longer pretended to hide its presence. It drifted through the hallways with that same unnatural glide, tall and impossible, shoulders nearly brushing the ceiling. Its blank face caught the flickers of the failing lights, shimmering with reflections that flickered between almost human shapes before dissolving back into smooth nothingness. It did not run. It did not stalk. It simply appeared at the end of a hallway in the doorway of the rec room outside the med bay and stood there, tilting its head, absorbing every detail. Crew members barricaded themselves inside storage rooms, piling crates in front of doors. Others tried hiding in vents or closets, but hiding only works against things that search. This creature did not search. It waited. It listened. It learned. I watched two researchers, Keller and Brandt, attempt to flee through the emergency exit during a brief moment when the storm outside weakened. They had gathered hastily, wearing oversized coats and carrying backpacks stuffed with supplies. Keller grabbed my arm. "Come with us," she begged. "We can make it to the old weather tower, shelter there, wait it out." "No one survives out there," I said. "No one survives in here either." Before I could answer, the hallway lights cut out. Pitch black. A soundless void. In that blackness, something shifted, soft, cold, impossibly close. The emergency lights flickered back on. The creature stood behind Keller. Its height dwarfed her. Its face leaned close to the back of her head. A faint, rippling shimmer moved across its blank skin, as if trying to form features but failing. Keller didn't scream. She didn't have time. The creature's elongated arm wrapped around her waist, lifting her effortlessly. Her legs scraped violently across the floor, boots dragging against metal, leaving streaks as she was pulled backward into a shadowed doorway. Brandt froze, his eyes bulged, his breath hitched in a broken sob. "Keller," he cried, stumbling forward. She vanished into the dark, her legs disappearing last. There was no scream. No thud. Just silence. Brandt bolted into the darkness after her. That was the last time I saw him. A sickening weight settled inside me. A hollow, sinking dread that dulled the edges of the world. The storm howled outside, slamming against the station like something desperate to get in, or something desperate to trap us inside with it. Elson found me standing motionless in the hallway, eyes unfocused, breathing shallow. "You need to come with me," he said urgently. I didn't move. "Elson," I whispered, it dragged her like she weighed nothing. His expression tightened, but he didn't waste time on grief. "It feeds on recognition," he said. "The moment she turned toward it, it knew her. The moment you gave it your attention, it knew you. The only way to survive is to deny it identity, deny it definition, deny it shape." He placed a shaking hand on my shoulder. "Come to the core lab. It's the most insulated part of the station, the least reflective, the safest place left." A loud metallic groan rattled through the hallway. The floor vibrated beneath our feet. Somewhere, glass shattered. We moved. The hallways had become unrecognizable. Doors hung open at odd angles. Some lights flickered violently while others were dead entirely. Papers littered the floor, scattered by drafts from broken seals. The storm outside screamed like a living thing. The temperature inside the station dropped with every passing minute, cold creeping through walls meant to withstand polar night. We passed a corridor where 3 crew members had barricaded themselves behind stacked tables. They clutched makeshift weapons, metal poles, broken chair legs, a fire extinguisher. Their eyes were huge, pupils dilated. One of them hissed at me, "Don't bring it here." "We aren't," Elson said. "Stay quiet, stay still, stay blind." We kept moving. As we neared the core lab, the lights surged, crackled, and then went completely out. Darkness swallowed us whole. "Elson," I whispered. "Keep your back against the wall," he said. "Do not look down the hallway, do not try to see anything." Something shifted ahead of us. A tall shadow moved across the corridor, silhouetted only when the emergency light flickered faintly back to life. Its limbs dragged along the wall without friction, leaving frost trails in its wake. The air grew painfully cold, biting into my skin like needles. "Don't speak," Elson whispered. The creature drifted across our path, its head tilting fractionally as if sensing the heat of our bodies. I held my breath, my vision blurred, my heartbeat echoed thickly in my ears. After several unbearable seconds, the creature glided away, disappearing around a corner with impossible silence. Elson tugged my arm. "Move now." We ran. The station shook again, another impact from outside, or perhaps from the creature shifting its shape somewhere inside the walls. By the time we reached the core lab, frost covered the doorknob. Elson forced it open and we slipped inside. He shut the door and locked it. The lab felt strangely untouched, dim but functional, insulated against the chaos outside. The hum of backup power provided a fragile sense of order. My breath trembled. "Elson," I whispered, "I saw it walking the halls, like it owns the place." He nodded slowly. "It does now. It's hunting." "No," he said, "it isn't hunting, it doesn't need to. Fear brings us to it, attention feeds it, recognition strengthens it." His voice dropped. "The more aware we are of it, the more real it becomes." The station groaned violently again. Something scraped along the exterior wall. Something tall. Something patient. something that had already begun shaping itself around the fragments of our identities. Elson met my eyes with grim certainty. "We survive," he said softly, by refusing to give it any more of ourselves. But survival felt distant now. The storm roared like the world breaking apart. The lights flickered as if trying desperately to stay alive. And somewhere in the station's trembling corridors, the man with no face glided closer, learning us, shaping us, preparing for whatever came next. The core lab felt like the last intact lung of a dying organism. Machines hummed weakly around us, lights flickered in trembling pulses, and the air tasted metallic as if saturated with the residue of too many failing circuits. Elson paced slowly across the room, his boots leaving faint prints of frost on the floor. The cold was seeping through every barrier now. The station was no longer keeping it out, it was letting it in. I sat on a crate, arms wrapped around myself, breath unsteady. "Elson," I said, "it's getting closer." He stopped walking. "It's already here," he replied softly. "It has been here for some time." My chest tightened. "Then what do we do?" His shoulders sagged under a weight he'd been carrying long before I arrived. He dragged a chair toward me and sat, folding his shaking hands on his knees. His eyes, deep, exhausted, hollowed by too many winters, held something I had not yet seen in him. "Resignation. It's time you knew the final rule," he said, "the one we don't write down." I swallowed hard. "Why not?" "Because no one wants to believe it," he said, "and no one should have to use it." My pulse hammered. "What is it?" Elson leaned in. "If the man with no face chooses you, the only way to escape is to give it someone else to become." The words did not make sense at first. They floated in the air like fragments of a language I didn't understand. "What?" I whispered. "You must give it an identity," Elson said. "Something incomplete, something false, a person who doesn't exist, a memory made of lies." My breath stopped. "Why? How does that help?" "Because it can only become what it can learn," he said. "It needs a shape, a history, a structure. If you feed it something that has no real roots, something impossible, it chases a ghost instead of a person. It starves itself on a lie." "And then what?" I asked. "It dies." "No," Elson said, "it doesn't die, but it lets go." The lab shook as a violent gust slammed against the exterior wall. A metal tray clattered off a counter. The lights flickered again, dimming until we could barely see each other. "Elson," I said, "if that's the last rule, why didn't you tell me sooner?" His expression told me everything. "Because," he said quietly, "only one person can use it each winter." My breath hitched, the cold inside me felt sharper. "No," I whispered. "Elson, no." He stood slowly, each movement deliberate, like a man choosing the last steps of his life. "It's been watching you since the tunnels," he said. "It's learning your voice, your posture, your fear, your reflection. If it finishes, you'll be the next Hayes, or worse, a more complete version." "I haven't given it everything," I said, choking on the words. "You don't have to," he said. "It's patient." Elson reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to me. The edges were worn, the ink faded. "What is this?" I asked. "A name," he said. "A life, a person who never existed. I created him years ago, my fail-safe." I opened the paper with trembling fingers. "A name, a date of birth, a childhood memory, a job, a family he never had, a place he never lived, a story woven from half-truths and imagination." "Elson," I said, "you can't go out there." He placed a hand on my shoulder. "It chose you," he said, "but I am choosing myself." The station shuddered again. Something moved in the hallway outside, soft, dragging, patient. "Elson," I whispered, "it's here." He nodded. "And I'm going to give it something better to chase." Before I could grab him, he stepped away, unlocking the core lab door. It swung open with a long, metallic groan. "Elson, please," I begged, "you don't have to do this." "Yes," he said, "I do." He stepped into the hallway. The emergency lights flickered, revealing the creature standing at the far end, taller than before, shoulders hunched, blank face shimmering faintly as it absorbed the shape of the world around it. Elson walked straight toward it. With no fear, no hesitation, only purpose. "Do not follow me," he said without turning. "Elson," I shouted. He raised his voice and spoke. "Not to me. To it." "Do you remember Marcus Hale?" he asked the creature. "I knew him when I was young." The creature tilted its head. Its featureless face rippled faintly, as though tasting the words. He was my brother, Elson said calmly. He was born in a small fishing town, loved storms, feared the ocean. He used to disappear for hours, hiding in rafters, pretending he could fly. His words flowed smoothly, but I knew they weren't real. They were the details from the paper, the false identity, the invented person. The creature leaned forward slightly, absorbing each syllable. Elson continued. Marcus moved often, never stayed in one place long, always searching for something he could not name. Sometimes he said he didn't belong anywhere. Sometimes he thought he wasn't real at all. The air vibrated with a strange, oppressive tension. The creature's height shifted subtly, its outline warping as though trying to reshape itself into the structure of the invented man. Elson's breath trembled now, his voice strained. He had a scar on his cheek from climbing a broken fence. He hated the sound of dripping taps. He could never remember dreams. His voice faltered. He staggered. But the creature leaned closer, hungry for the story, devouring the false memories like sustenance. Elson, I cried. He forced out the final lines, voice cracking like ice under weight. He died searching for a place he belonged, and he never found it. Silence flooded the hallway. Elson swayed, then collapsed. His body hit the metal floor with a hollow thud. The creature froze, its head twitched. Its shape trembled slightly, as if struggling to contain the incomplete identity it had been fed. Then it turned away from us. It faced the far exit, and drifted toward it, searching, seeking, wanting more of the invented man. I fell to my knees beside Elson. His eyes stared upward, unseeing, unmoving. A faint breath escaped him, one last cold exhale. Elson, I whispered. But he was gone. He had followed his own final rule, and given the creature a ghost to chase. After Elson collapsed and the creature drifted away in pursuit of the false identity he had crafted, the station fell into a deeper silence than I had ever known. Not the silence of calm or stillness, but the silence of something vast and hollow, an emptiness carved into the world by fear. I dragged myself back into the core lab, locking the door with shaking hands even though I knew locks meant nothing to the thing wandering the halls. My breath fogged in the air, thick and heavy. The temperature was dropping faster than the backup systems could compensate. The walls creaked under the pressure of the storm outside, bending slightly with each violent gust, as if the wind were trying to fold the entire station inward. I crouched beneath a metal table, pulling a thermal blanket around my shoulders. Frost crept along the floor tiles, forming thin white veins that branched outward like roots of some spreading infection. Every time I exhaled, crystals formed along the edge of the blanket. My fingers numbed, turning stiff and clumsy. The lights flickered, then went out completely. The station plunged into darkness. An honest darkness, total, suffocating, complete. The kind of darkness where the mind begins inventing shapes just to have something to recoil from. Somewhere in that blackness, metal hissed softly as frost thickened over the vents. Pipes groaned, machinery stuttered. The entire structure trembled under the weight of cold and terror. Then I heard it. A soft glide. Not footsteps. Not breathings. A movement that belonged to something without weight, without friction, without presence in the way humans understand presence. It drifted down the hallway, slow and patient, the air tightening with its passing. A faint whisper of displaced cold brushed beneath the door. I held my breath until my lungs burned. The creature paused outside the core lab. I felt it before I heard anything, an atmospheric pressure that squeezed the air around me, a pull in the space behind my eyes, a sense of recognition, faint and distant, like the memory of a dream that refuses to die. It was searching, not for me specifically, but for the person Elson had invented, the ghost, the lie. But lies unravel easily. This one was unraveling now. The creature shifted. The faint scrape of frost sliding off its surface reached my ears, too soft to be real yet unmistakably present. Then it moved on. A glide through the dark, a whisper of cold trailing behind it. I could almost picture its tall form sliding past the doorframe, blank face tilted, empty skin shimmering faintly in the reflection of emergency lights that no longer worked. Minutes passed. Or hours. Time dissolved into a trembling, fragile thread. The creature returned twice, once pausing long enough that my vision blurred from holding my breath, and once brushing the wall with a sound like ice cracking underfoot. Each time, the pressure inside my head grew sharper, as if it were trying to reach through thought itself and pull something familiar from me. But I kept still. Silent, blind. It could not claim what I refused to offer. Eventually the presence receded. The temperature fell even lower. The darkness thickened into something almost physical. The storm outside screamed against the station walls, an enraged, tortured wail that sounded not like weather but like something alive, something colossal, something furious. When the storm finally broke, the silence that followed was worse. Not relief, not peace. A silence of aftermath. A silence of endings. I waited an hour after the last sound faded before I crawled out from beneath the table. My limbs shook. My breath came in thin shivers, frost clung to my hair. The metal of the doorknob burned my palm when I touched it. I opened the core lab door slowly. The hallway beyond was unrecognizable. Pipes hung from the ceiling like torn ligaments. Panels of insulation lay scattered across the floor. Frost coated every surface, thick, uneven, jagged, as if the station had been flash-frozen mid-collapse. Emergency lights were shattered, leaving only faint glimmers of reflected snow through cracks in the outer walls. The silence pressed against my eardrums. I moved through the wreckage one room at a time. In the rec room, chairs were overturned, tables split, ration wrappers frozen solid to the floor. No bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. Only drag marks, long and smooth, carved through the frost as if something had pulled weightless forms effortlessly into the dark. The infirmary was empty except for the lingering smell of antiseptic, and the faint outline of a human shape melted into the frost on a gurney. The communications room was destroyed. Panels ripped open, wires dangling like exposed nerves. Screens shattered. No reflection remained in anything, every surface warped, broken, or coated with frost so thick it erased shape entirely. When I reached the main hall, I saw the largest drag mark yet, cutting a deep path through the snow blown in from a broken window. It led outside, into the blinding whites, into the storm's remains, into nothing. I followed it to the threshold but did not step beyond. The cold knifed through me even standing near the opening. Beyond the perimeter lay only endless snow, wind-smoothed and untouched except for the long trail that disappeared into the distance. The creature had taken them all. Every last one. Not a single crew member remained. Not even Elson's body. I stood there staring at the desolation, listening to my heartbeat echo in the hollow station. Dawn would not come for weeks. The sun was a forgotten concept buried beneath the months-long night of the polar winter. The temperature would continue to drop. The generators were failing. The backup systems were dying. The walls creaked under stresses they were never meant to endure. And I was alone. Entirely. Utterly. A single human breath inside a tomb of frost. I looked out into the white expanse, knowing something wandered out there, carrying pieces of voices, shapes, memories. Searching for more. Searching for what remained. Searching for me. The quiet settled around me like falling ash. This was the longest night. And it was far from over. In the aftermath of the storm, I wandered through the dead station like a ghost. Survival became mechanical, checking for remaining heat pockets, scavenging what little food hadn't frozen, testing equipment even though I already knew nothing had survived the power collapse. The silence had weight now. It pressed against my ribs, filling the empty corridors with a presence that felt almost physical. I carried a lantern from room to room, its dim glow bouncing weakly across the frost-slick floors. The beam looked fragile against the enormity of the dark. Every sound I made echoed too loudly. Every breath felt intruded upon. In the comms corridor, I saw a panel that hadn't shattered. A window, small, rectangular, clouded with frost but still intact. It was one of the few surfaces reflective enough to show anything. I approached it out of instinct, out of habit, out of the desperate, lingering hope that maybe something human still existed in this place. I wish I hadn't. At first, I assumed the frost was distorting my reflection. The shape staring back at me was my height, my build, my stance, but the face was wrong. Featureless. Smooth. Blank skin stretched tight across where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. Like a sheet of ice pulled over a skull. My stomach clenched. I leaned closer, trying to understand the distortion, but as I moved forward, the reflection did not mirror me. It moved too quickly, stepping forward at a speed that did not match mine, as if eager to meet me at the glass. I froze. The reflection froze too, but half a second later. Not mimicry. Not a mistake. A delay. A learning curve. My lantern flickered, frost crawled up the window like veins breaking through skin. The blank reflection tilted its head, the exact angle I had come to fear, the exact tilt it had used when standing outside the station. when it walked down the hallway, when it sat on the edge of my bed. I stepped backward. The reflection stepped backward, but not at the same time. It moved after me, slower at first, then catching up, as if correcting itself, as if adjusting its understanding. My legs weakened. "Elson," I whispered, breath shivering, "what did you leave me with?" The room answered with silence. Not stillness. Silence with breath behind it. Silence with eyes. Silence with shape. Because in that moment I felt something else. A coldness behind me. Not a draft, not temperature. A presence. A shape occupying the air where no shape should be. The kind of cold that presses into the spine, sliding between vertebrae like a blade. The kind of cold that knows you. The kind of cold that mimics your heartbeat to learn its rhythm. My breath hitched, fogging the lantern glass. Slowly, so slowly I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I turned my head an inch. Just enough to sense it. Not enough to see it. It stood behind me, tall, patient, its blank face inches from the back of my skull. I felt it without seeing it. The air bent subtly around its form. My body recognized the wrong gravity. My skin prickled with the electric static of being studied. It shifted its weight, no sound, no footsteps, just the faint pressure of something aligning its posture to match mine. We stood in mirror poses. One reflection at the window, one creature behind me, one terrified human in the center, held between the two like a hinge in a door that was about to break. A whisper rose from the window. Not from the creature behind me. The window. My reflection. A faint scraping sound formed into syllables, then warped syllables shaped into something disturbingly familiar. My own voice. But without breath, without warmth, without humanity, a hollow rendition of myself. It said my name. Smoothly, now perfectly, no tremor, no childlike softness. It had practiced. It had learned. I staggered away from the glass. The reflection didn't stagger. It stepped toward the window instead, continuing forward, pressing its blank face into the frost-covered panel as though trying to push through. The presence behind me moved with the same cadence. A mirrored advance. An inevitable conclusion. My pulse hammered against my ribs, shaking through my whole body. Every rule I had memorized, every whispered warning, every desperate protocol felt meaningless now. The creature wasn't waiting behind doors or lurking in storms. It didn't need whiteout to mimic or darkness to shape itself. It didn't need distance, or invitation, or opportunities. It already had enough of me to stand beside my reflection. It already had enough to correct the last missing pieces. "Elson," I whispered again, as if saying his name might conjure a shield. "You said it would chase the lie. You said the false identity would draw it away." But the truth settled into my bones like ice shoved under my skin. It hadn't forgotten me. It had simply paused. Watched. Listened. Learned. Elson had given it a false identity, but the creature had not abandoned the real one. Not when it already had roots planted inside my reflection, inside my voice, inside the shape of my silence. I felt the air shift behind me. The creature leaned closer, not to touch me, not to harm me, to match me with surgical precision, like a reflection stepping into its natural place. The window fogged over completely. My reflection vanished, but the faint outline of the blank face remained pressed against the glass. Behind me, the creature's breathless cold seeped along the edges of my neck, tracing the outline of my skull as though mapping me. I squeezed my eyes shut. Rules meant nothing now. Not silence, not ignorance, not denials. Every breath I took, it mirrored. Every tremble in my fingers, it copied. Every shift in my weight, it learned. It had become patient. It had become intimate. It had become something that did not need storms or reflections or darkness. It had become something that understood me. When I opened my eyes, the blank face in the glass was gone. But the cold behind me remained. And I knew with a certainty as sharp as frostbite. The man with no face no longer needed the window to reflect me. It needed only mace. The recorder flickers with a weak red light as I press the button. It crackles softly in my shaking hands. The power is almost gone. The heat is almost gone. The station is no longer shelter. It is no longer even structure. It is a hollow shell of metal ribs and frost, vibrating with the slow footsteps of something that understands the hallways better than we ever did. I sit on the floor of the storage cabin, knees pulled to my chest, blanket wrapped around me though it no longer holds any warmth. My breath curls upward in white streams. The temperature is dropping so quickly that each inhale feels like drawing knives into my lungs. I begin to speak. My name doesn't matter anymore. My voice sounds foreign to me, thin and cracked. I steady the recorder against my knee. If you find this, I whisper, please listen to everything, even if the rules have already changed, even if the winter is long past, even if the station is buried under a century of ice. Outside my small room, something moves in the corridor. A soft step, not a footstep. A weightless shift, like the air itself rearranging its pressure. It's listening. I swallow hard and continue. The man with no face is evolving. Elson tried to stop it. He gave it a false identity. He made a sacrifice I never understood until too late. My voice wavers. But the lie wasn't enough. It drew the creature away, yes, but only long enough for it to understand the difference between truth and invention. Long enough for it to realize that a false identity can feed it only so much. A faint breath brushes under the door. Not warm, not even cold, the absence of breath, the silhouette of breath. I force myself to keep talking. It didn't lose interest in me, it simply learned me better, it watched me in the reflections, it watched me in the dark, it listened to my heartbeat, it listened to the patterns of my thinking. The recorder's light flickers again. In the last few hours, I have felt it in every corridor. It doesn't need to hide now. It doesn't need invitation or broken rules or mirrors or storms. It has patience. That is what no one prepared us for. It has the patience of something that has lived longer than identity itself. The floor shivers. A single step. Another. Closer. My fingers tremble so terribly that the recorder nearly slips from my hand. I brace myself and keep speaking. If you're listening, you must rewrite the rules. They are not warnings, they are not protections, they are not enough. I take a breath, it comes out ragged. The old rules kept it away when it was primitive, when it depended on mimicry, when it needed us to acknowledge it first. But now. My throat tightens. Now it doesn't wait for us, it doesn't need us to look, it doesn't need us to speak. It learns us the way ice learns shape, slowly, with pressure, with time. I lean closer to the recorder. It becomes whoever survives long enough to witness it. Something brushes against the doorframe. A whisper of movement. A hush of attention. I feel the cold behind the wall, a presence so thin and so absolute it feels like being watched by silence itself. Elson's last rule was right, I say quietly. You must never give it your true identity, but it will learn it anyway, not through your voice or your face, through the space you occupy, through the shape of your fear. My hand falls to my side, weak. I can feel it matching my breathing now. The words shake out of me, barely audible. Every inhalation, every exhalation, it takes them as if they belong to it, as if I am already becoming an echo. The footsteps outside the door stop. Completely. No breathings. No shifting. Just a stillness. Waiting. Listening. I close my eyes, fighting the instinct to hold my breath. Elson said survival depended on refusing to acknowledge it. But what happens when it no longer needs acknowledgement? What happens when it learns enough to erase the difference between observer and observed? Tears freeze on my cheeks. If you find this recording, if there is still a world outside this winter, do not come looking for me. Do not come looking for the others. Do not come looking for the man with no face. I look at the doors. Something stands on the other side, taller than before, more defined. Its shape no longer flickers. It no longer needs to mimic. It has nearly completed the shape it wants. My confession is ending, I whisper, not because I have finished, but because it has. The recorder trembles in my hand as the door makes a soft sound, wood straining under pressure, metal shifting slightly as something leans against it. A gentle push, a patient tap. I inhale sharply. It inhales with me. Exactly with me. The same rhythm. The same cadence. The same breath. The last breath that still belongs only to me. I hear it, I whisper, I feel it, it is time. The footsteps resume. Slow, soft, right outside my door. I hope you never meet it, I say, voice nearly gone. I hope no one ever does again. The light on the recorder blinks once. Then goes dark. The footsteps stop. And the longest night ends with silence.